prayer is the action of being able to receive the blessing of the sun, the warmth, the connectedness of the sunshine. Eventually, we learn to pray not only for ourselves, but for all beings.
Welcome to Healing at the Edge, a podcast featuring interviews, archived talks, and teachings on conscious living, conscious dying with RamDev Dale Borglum, brought to you by the Be Here Now Network. Dale has been a meditation teacher for nearly 50 years and has been at the bedside of the dying and their loved ones for over 40 years. He was the director of the Hanuman Foundation and founded the first Center for Conscious Dying in Santa Fe, New Mexico. He's taught with Stephen Levine, Ram Dass, and countless others on the spiritual path. Dale is still working with the dying today. For more information, please visit livingdying.org.
Today, I would like to talk with you about prayer. Maharaji said once, "Tell me, what do you ask of God?" And that quote of his keeps resonating through my heart. Tell me, what do you ask of God? My life, as my practice has evolved over the decades, has in a way shifted more from meditation and trying to tame my mind to a more devotional prayer-based practice, partly mantra, partly prayer. And yet prayer is a kind of a tricky topic, particularly for anyone who was raised in the Christian church. There might be some bad memories of how you were taught to pray. As a little boy, I was taught to kneel by the side of my bed at night and say, "Now I lay me down to sleep. I pray the Lord my soul to keep. If I should die before I wake, I pray the Lord my soul to take." Right? So every night I'm thinking I might die as I'm asleep here, and maybe God will take me to heaven, and maybe he won't because I've been a pretty bad boy today. So that was not a very good introduction to prayer practice for me. It didn't really lead to a lot of confidence. And one of my favorite all-time quotes, Saint Teresa of Avila says, "The only mistake in prayer is to pray as if God were not present. The only mistake in prayer is to pray as if God were not present." Prayer is an essential part of all contemplative practice, regardless of tradition, whether you're a Buddhist meditator, a Christian mystic, Sufi, you're practicing Hindu traditional practices. Prayer is really at the foundation of every tradition, even in Vipassana Buddhism, taking refuge, saying, "I take refuge in the Buddha, in the Dharma, and in the Sangha," and even possibly chanting the Heart Sutra is certainly a prayer practice. Prayers are not really about doing something or getting something, but to explore being and becoming. And as I was thinking about this talk, some questions came to my mind. First and foremost is, who is this God you are talking to? Mm-hmm. And then secondly, what is your relationship with this God? And very often we begin our prayer practice with, "I need help." We're younger, emotionally, physically, possibly. But if we really begin to understand, as our practice deepens and we understand that the Buddha, the deity, that God is purely an expression of ultimate reality, that it's a manifestation of emptiness, to that extent only do we receive blessings when we pray. To the extent that we have faith in the boundless qualities of love and compassion that God or the deity or the guru really are manifestations of, to that extent, we receive the blessings of these qualities. In Buddhism, they often liken how prayer works to the action of the sun. The sun is always shining, even if it's nighttime. we're in the shadow of the earth, the sun is shining, or imagine that you're down in a deep well and it's cold and it's dark there and there's only a tiny bit of light when the sun is directly overhead. Still, the sun is always shining. And prayer is the action of being able to receive the blessing of the sun, the warmth, the connectedness of the sunshine. Eventually, we learn to pray not only for ourselves, but for all beings. And prayer becomes a very direct practice for removing the obstacles, the counterproductive circumstances that create ignorance and confusion in the mind. So a question arises then, if the deity is empty, why do we pray to the deity? Or another way of putting it is, if God is everything, why do we have to pray to God? Because he knows what we need in the first place. And that, for decades, actually kind of inspired me to not ask for anything at all. I mean, I had this very personal relationship, do have this personal relationship with Maharaji. And at the same time, I couldn't ask him for anything except on very few exceptions, when somebody really close to me was really sick or dying, I might ask if that person received some comfort. But it was almost impossible for me to ask for something for myself. But the guru or the deity is both understood from relative truth and absolute truth. That Maharaji or the deity is just a pure manifestation of the formless. And there was a guy living in India in form, right? And there are many people, including myself, who have had direct experience of deities showing up in person, right? Hanuman showed up in my bedroom once. I was at another temple in India, Jagannath. No, it was Badrinath. I'm sorry, Badrinath up in the Himalayas. And the deity Badrinath was initially just this big piece of rock with clothes on up at the front of the altar. And all of a sudden, Badrinath became this living deity. So that the relative and the absolute are completely intertwined. They're inseparable, relative and absolute truth. So on the absolute level, our nature is Buddha. We are the deity, but we're unaware of this. We're lost in relative truth until practice deepens enough. Maharaji said at one point, you must love God with passion. You must love God with passion. So that at a certain point in practice where learning to create a relationship with the relative deity until we get to the point where we are resting with the absolute deity. Let's talk about levels of prayer. The first level of prayer is when we're reaching out for help. You want intercessional prayer, it's called. There's this big, great, all-powerful God, and there's this small, hopeful me. God is huge. God knows everything. I need help. And there is very often an assumed sense of inadequacy. In Christianity, there's a lot of this original sin, this sense of guilt that I don't really deserve grace. Maybe God will be nice to me if I pray hard enough, or I'm a good enough person. And we get lost in thought. We get lost in fear, guilt, and shame. The lower chakras are still but they're holding these obscurations that keep us from resting in the heart. So if God knows everything, why do I have to ask Maharaji to purify my heart? So it's not really that he needs me to ask, but I need me to ask. I need to fully admit where I'm caught, that I can really be humble enough, be present enough with my own stuckness to be able to feel it, open up to it, and ask for help. In the 12 steps, the very first step is admitting your life is out of control. You need help. You're turning your life, your practice over to the higher power. Thomas Merton, the Christian mystic Thomas Merton, said, "Love and prayer are learned in the hour when prayer becomes impossible and the heart turns to stone." Sometimes it's easy to pray, the heart's open, you feel full, but we really learn about reaching out when we can't feel anything at all. It's been my experience, and from all the reading I've done, it's pretty much universal, that we go through periods of lightness and darkness, whether we're meditating or whether we're praying. There are times when grace descends, we feel it, and there are other times when the heart feels like a stone. There's no warmth, there's no connectedness. And at that point, how strong is our practice? Do we give up? Do we say, I'm not going to practice, I'm going to wait for things to change? Or can we be with even that? Now, admittedly, what we're talking about right now is very dualistic. There's me, there's God out there. I'm not God, I need help. And many people get stuck in that relationship, in that prayer relationship, in that devotional relationship with God, because the next step is being in relationship. There's a sense that I'm loving God and God is loving me, because in this first stage, we're really learning about how we repress our feelings. Can we, instead of repressing, undercut it by saying a prayer, whether it's a prayer with a lot of words, whether it's mantra, using that as a way of getting in contact with those places in ourselves that are connected. So devotional prayer, the qualities of the open heart, we've talked about these so many times. It's a connected heart, a spacious heart, and a warm heart. Prayer unites the soul with God. Even though the inner essence and the true nature of the soul are always with God, the effects of our behavior do not always reflect this likeness externally. Prayer becomes the witness that the soul wills as God wills. It soothes the consciousness and shapes us for grace. Julian of Norwich. So grace, prayer shapes us for grace. There's a difference between the way we experience love in mindfulness meditation and in devotional practice. And at some point, we have to kind of make a choice. In mindfulness, we pay attention to what we're feeling. We're aware of what we're feeling. In devotional practice, we die into love. Instead of paying attention to this is what it feels like to love, we completely die into the love. And in this second stage of prayer, when there's this relationship where even though we're separate from God, there's a back and forth relationship. It's not like God is up there and I'm down here so much as it's a back and forth thing, that it's at least as much about receiving as about doing. That prayer becomes about receiving the blessing, receiving the grace that is always available. The Bible talks about become as little children to enter into the kingdom of God. Maharaji would say things like, if you remember God, he takes care of everything. If you love God, there are no demons. It's better to see God than everything to try to figure it out, try to figure things out. Everything is possible by God's name. So in this devotional stage, so juicy, having this loving relationship with God, but it's still the sense that I'm me and God is out there, and I'm really separate from God. It's not yet the tantric stage where we begin to realize that the God we're praying to is our own true nature. So that I've had this experience, and in fact, this experience is kind of what led me to think about this talk. I had this experience where I was just walking up the stairs about a week ago, and it was a bit lost in thought, a bit distracted. And I said my mantra one time of, let me calm down, let me be here. And then I said it one more time as I took another step up the stairs of, oh, I feel this connection. And then the third time I said it, and it was God, and I'm God, and the mantra was God, and walking up the stairs was God. Just that quick, in like 3 steps up the stairs, going from I'm disconnected, I need to get connected, I am connected, I feel this love, I receive this love, to it's not something outside of myself only. It's outside, it's inside, it's everything. So that there's a lot going on in the world right now. All these student protests. My son is at UCLA. I haven't bought a ticket for commencement exercises because we don't know what's going to happen. There's so many protests, they might cancel graduation. Not the biggest problem in the world, but people are protesting because of what's going on in Gaza. Both sides of the story have a lot to be said for them, obviously. So much to think about, so much to be upset about. Can we, in the midst of this world that is in some ways seeming like it's about to spin out of control, find this rock solid experience of prayerfulness that allows life to become a prayer itself? Here's a quote from a Sufi teacher: living is prayer. I think that is when I am at my best, because seeing through prayer provides a remarkable clarity, not in the formal sense, because it is always the best, but in the lens of love for every tattered inch of this earth. Life is prayer, seeing even all the craziness through that lens of prayer. For many of us, there's the times when we're practicing, and then there were the times in the world hoping that practice is going to affect us as we're moving about in our lives. We're raising our children, we're making money, we're doing the things we do in life. Can we use prayer as a way of bringing practice into moment-to-moment experience, into such connectedness with what we're doing that there is ego death itself, that each moment is an offering, each moment is a connection, each moment is the wisdom of this particular oneness that we're part of. Tantra is really giving up our identity, that I'm the person who's praying, I'm the person that needs help, I'm the person that's doing good. Here's one of my favorite, I don't know if it's a poem exactly, but a short saying from a book called The Hasidic Masters on Contemplative Prayer. Before you begin to pray, decide that you are ready to die in that very prayer. There are some people so intense in their worship who give up so much of their strength to prayer that if not for a miracle, they would die after uttering only 2 or 3 words. It is only through God's great kindness that such people live, that their soul does not leave them as they are joined to Him in prayer. I've said the mantra that Maharaji gave me, I don't know how many millions of times, and I've often wondered if I could really say it 1 or 2 or 3 times with that intensity that he's talking about, would that be enough? Could you really say it so that it set your soul on fire with the wisdom of your oneness with that which is? For many of us, prayer eventually turns into mantra, not a lot of words, but one word or one phrase that eventually becomes the background of our lives. I've begun to notice as I meditate less and say mantra more that really a lot of the time when I'm not using my mind to do a mental activity, the mantra is just going on kind of all by itself in the background, that I'm not even having to do it, that the mantra is saying itself. In the Bible, it says pray without ceasing. And obviously, we sleep sometimes. We have to think about our job or about the grocery list or whatever. How can we pray without ceasing? What does that really mean? And to me, what it means is that the prayer deepens to the point that the essence of the prayer is going on all the time. Even if we're thinking about something else, the thinking is happening through the filter, the lens, the feeling of that prayer. And at that depth, then, we can even begin to talk about non-dual prayer in the sense that as we're praying, there isn't an I who's praying, that the prayer is praying itself. Who's praying? Stephen Levine wrote the book, Who Dies? Ramana Maharshi says, who am I? Who are you? And we could say here, who is praying? As the prayer deepens, any effort where I'm doing it gets in the way of the connectedness. Any effort, I'm doing effort, I've got to get somewhere. I'm praying so I can get from here to there, is really, in a sense, an obstacle that needs to be surrendered. So that one of my main practices is I just focus on the feeling in my chest, and I say my mantra with the breath. I breathe in, I breathe out, say the mantra. Sometimes I'll think of a person, I'll say the mantra, and then I'll breathe out and feel love for that person or compassion. Breathe in, say the mantra, breathe out, just going through my day. It brings a great sense of equanimity and peacefulness rather than I've got to be doing it. So I would like to hear from other people about prayer. As I say, I really never talked about this before. It's always seemed like a personal thing. Meditation is kind of impersonal, right? We can talk about Buddhist meditation and all the nuances of it. And prayer is kind of like my love relationship with my beloved. Maharaj even said, never talk about your wife, your wealth, or your sadhana, because there's such personal things. People compare with you, they get jealous. And in a way, you don't talk about your love life. Talking about my prayer life is talking about my inner love life in a certain sense. So I see that Riza has his hand up and would like to say something, and you please unmute yourself.
Hi, Dale.
Hi
Good
there.
morning. Thank you for the beautiful talk and the gathering. So one thing I wanted to mention and get your thoughts on is I often find it kind of a paradox when I pray for something, because I feel like I'm praying for anything. And you once said this to me, which was very profound, that if there's anything to pray for, that's faith, which makes a lot of sense, because if you have faith, then what else do you need? But even for that, when I focus on maybe praying for faith, I feel myself really attached to the faith. I feel like it's kind of I'm not detached. I'm really kind of in an anxious state of mind, really trying to get myself out of it. I'm like, oh God, I'm basically praying for faith because I want or need something else. So I wanted to basically see what you think about how do you even, like, I mean, I understand it's a paradox, but do you even need to pray for it? I guess that's my question. I mean, isn't it like just a sign of attachment? Even if you pray for faith, is
Right.
it a sign that you're attached?
Right. Yeah, that's a great question. And for a while, I studied with this group called the Diamond Heart or the Ridwan School, and the teacher there, Hamid Ali, talked about pure attachment, golden attachment, if you will, that you're attached to God. Uh, Basically, he was coming from a Sufi tradition, and he was saying that there are some attachments that are good. Being attached to God is good. And I had been a Buddhist, and I thought all attachment bad, non-attachment good, right? And when he said that, it's just like this light bulb exploded. Light bulb went off in my head. Something exploded in my heart. And what I was trying to point out in the talk today was that there are levels of prayer. And in the beginning, we are doing it in a very dualistic way, a way where maybe you feel lost, like the first step of the 12 steps. You're saying, I need help. Please help. And prayer has kind of two dimensions. There's the human dimension, the relative finite human dimension, and the infinite divine dimension. And we have to admit the human part. When you don't have faith, you can say, I need faith here. And at the other end of the spectrum, as I was just mentioning, is you get to the point where there's not even anybody who's praying, that the ego has been dissolved in the prayer itself. So that if in the beginning you really aren't feeling faith and you feel that lack, certainly admitting it, I mean, and then kind of the other complication here is that there's the relative deity, the absolute deity. The absolute deity knows everything. It's like it's empty. There's nobody to pray to. You're doing it for your own opening, for your own understanding, if you will. At the same time, there are these things that Maharaji would say, like he would say, if somebody looks at my picture, I am there. If somebody thinks about me, I come to them, right? So there's this more intimate human dimension of God that when you really reach out in a very dualistic, I need help way, that at least sometimes something happens. Sometimes it doesn't happen, or at least it doesn't happen in the way that you'd like it to happen. It's very tricky. I mean, like the Rolling Stone says, you don't always get what you need. You don't always get what you want. You don't always get what you want. You always get what you need. And I'm not sure they're a good source of Dharma wisdom, but maybe in this case they are. So my experience has been that it's easy to get stuck in a certain level of practice or level of prayer and not realize that you can start out saying, I need faith. And then when the faith begins to come, you don't notice it and you're stuck in, I need. And that there's the way that our psychological conditioning, our anxiety, our guilt, and our fear are coloring the way we pray makes things messy, right? There's a complicated personality that's doing the prayer practice, and that's okay. That's who we are. It's okay to be human. So, I mean, in a way, we're praying to the deepest part of ourselves. And once again, those questions I asked in the beginning, who is the God you were talking to, and what is your relationship with that God? That I think it's useful to step back and look at those questions occasionally. And maybe God evolves as you evolve, right? Maybe the God that you thought of when you were 5 years old or 15 years old is not the same God that you're praying to now. And it might not be the same God you're praying to when you're as old as I am. Long answer to a very good question.
That was
Claire.
great. Thank you.
Thank you, Risa. Thank you so much. When I went to India, I had gone there straight out of graduate school. And I was there with Maharaji in India for over a year. And when finally I was getting kicked out of India along with Ramdas and a bunch of other people because we'd overstayed our visas, I went to Maharaji and said, well, what should I do now that I'm going back to America? I used to be a scientist, but I don't think I want to do that anymore. And I thought he'd say, why don't you become a psychotherapist, or why don't you do this or that? He said, my only instructions are to keep saying the mantra that I gave you, to keep praying. That's the only instruction. And maybe that's the only instruction any of us need. Keep praying, keep remembering God. He said, if you remember God, he takes care of everything. It's hard to have faith in that. Risa, you want to say something again?
Yeah. So as you know, people were talking, like beautiful notes and questions. I just remembered I was listening to a guided meditation from RamDev's, and basically he was saying that you breathe in this kind of non-physical uh, thing, like called soma or ambrosia, and like you manifest, you use that as like you breathe in, you breathe out. Your intention is to keep someone in mind that may need healing or help or something. And during the practice, something that was very interesting to me, he mentioned that as you send that energy to them for healing, keep in mind that you want to do that not because it's at your will, but your intention should be that only if it's thy will, only if it's in the way of things. And that was very profound to me, because again, I was like, okay, as I'm praying and I'm like, okay, do this, do that. That was that subtle shift in my mind, that even when I'm asking for something, like he clearly mentioned that it has to be like, don't be kind of attached to that. It has to be, I want this type of thing.
Right.
It should only happen if it's at their will. So I just want to share that as well.
Thank you. That's an important point. And we think we know what's the best thing to happen next. Healing takes very strange forms at times. Sometimes people have to get sicker before they get better. Sometimes people have to suffer more before they're willing to let go. And another time I heard Ramdas say to somebody who was a healer and was talking to Ramdas about how to be a better healer. Ramdas said to him, do you see the person? Do you see your client as being whole when you're doing the healing work? Or do you see them as somebody that needs to be fixed? Right. And so the highest prayer, the highest healing is realizing that you're whole and the other person's whole, that you're resting in that oneness, you're resting in oneness with them. And then out of that, let the healing happen that's supposed to happen. And we don't know what that is. Not my will, but thine be done. Everybody's going to die eventually. right? And we often think that healing is preventing death, preventing illness, preventing upset. And sometimes we need to, I mean, karma is a very complex subject. What do people need to go through? And there are so many stories about Maharaji where sometimes he seemed to intervene and stop people from suffering, and other times he would let people suffer. And there was no way of predicting which of those two things which of those two responses would be coming out of him. So one more question, and then we'll take a break. Carla?
Hello. It's not so much a question, it's more of a sharing.
Please.
I think prayer to me has become a sort of invitation to God to enter my heart and to really allow myself to be felt by God. So even when I'm like, I don't know, raging or angry or judging people, to then ask God to, or allow God to feel myself from the inside. And I find it needs a lot of trust to not be rejected, but to be loved, even when I'm, I don't know, not behaving accordingly or whatever. And another thing I noticed that sometimes I kind of get a sense of God when I do that, and it's really pleasant, and sometimes nothing happens. And often it's when a part of myself is active that rejects God or needs to do some grief work before he or she can allow God in. So it's been really kind of a good step on my journey, I guess.
Could I ask how much that deepened and changed when you were really sick?
That only came up like over the last 4 weeks, maybe. So
okay,
I haven't done that before. No.
So I know Carla, and is it okay if I mention this? That she has a very severe case of long COVID.
Hi, Dale.
Hi.
Wonderful talk on prayer today. It's really deep. My question is, I'm a volunteer at the local hospice here, and I got a call or a text message Friday for a new hospice patient, and they said she really loves meditation. So I went over to her house, and she was alone. I walked into I knocked and went into the door, and she was laying in bed, and she's very close to death. And she was just calling. I think it's her daughter. She said, "Chris, Chris, 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 Chris," just kind of round and round and round. And I sat down next to her, and I said, "Can you find your breath? Can you find it at the tip of your nose?" And then she said, "Yes." And then she calmed down for about 30 seconds and then went back into this loop of talking. And so I was there an hour and a half, and I tried many times to get her to quiet. And I guess I was looking at myself, and there's this real fear that was coming up in me, because I think there's just the lack of control. And it was because I was there by myself with her. There was no caregivers or anything there. So I have this, my question is this. One is, if you have any thoughts on my future visit next week. And the other thing is about how to work with this fear. If you have any thoughts on working with this fear that's coming up.
Fear in you of loss of control?
Yeah.
that you might die in the way she's dying, or that you?
No, it's more that she keeps saying Chris, and I can't. I tried to intervene, by okay, come back to your breath, and then just 30 seconds, and then she's back to it again.
Yeah.
So I don't know. I'm thinking maybe I should just sit there and let her go, and just
Right. Got it.
So I just wonder what your thoughts are on that.
So I often make this kind of facile line that working with the dying is just a lot like working with the living, and whether it's a meditation retreat or a dying retreat, it's the same kind of stuff. But that's a little bit too easy. It's a little bit too general. And there does come a point for many people toward the end of their life where the way they've been practicing of I'm trying to do something, I'm trying to control my mind, I'm doing this, I'm doing that, there's some effort involved, is counterproductive. That they're going the other direction, if you will. It's about letting go. It's not about doing anything. It's about surrendering into being out of control, surrendering into whatever is happening next, rather than I'm doing something to create structure. I'm doing something to find more calmness. And certainly, to the extent that you are working with your fear of loss of control that is arising when you're sitting with her, that you're not able to change her in the way that your ego structure is saying, I'd be a better hospice volunteer if I could get her to stop doing this and start doing that. Right. That you're feeling that fear in your body. You're being mindful of it. You're having compassion for that place in you. That you're working the program as you're sitting there with her, then that's giving her this living invitation, this model, that this moment is workable. This moment is open to mindfulness, it's open to compassion. And we don't really know how that's going to manifest. It might be that she's still in this loop of calling out this name, and that's okay. And that you trying to get her to do something and her not succeeding might make it more difficult for both of you, right? I've been at the bedside of so many people who say things like, I've been meditating for decades and now I'm dying and I'm failing as a meditator. I'm dying poorly. Not only am I dying, I'm feeling guilty about the way I'm dying, right? Which is double trouble, right? So to realize that letting go of control is maybe a messy process, and it doesn't look pretty from the outside at times. And to forgive yourself for not being the perfect volunteer. When I was in the process of meeting a lot of yogis, saints, roshis, lamas were coming through the Bay Area back in the day, I would ask them, my test question was, if I had a friend who was dying and they were afraid and they weren't a very good meditator, what's the best thing I could do? And almost all the good ones said, merge your mind with the one mind and then merge your mind with the mind of your friend. So the deepest healing, and what if somebody's approaching death, why don't we go to the deepest healing instead of intermediate healing? The deepest healing is, how much can you be resting in non-duality with them, right? And for you to be feeling they've got to get to this other place, what message are they getting? The message is, he's not even dying, and he's feeling that something's wrong here that's got to be fixed. I'm really in trouble.
Yeah, I see that.
Right. So So being able to, for all of us, we don't have to wait till we're at somebody's bedside, but a lot of fear of death and a lot of problems in meditation are learning to let go of control. I was talking to a guy just yesterday who had this remarkable experience during meditation. And as soon as he had it, he needed to figure it out, to categorize it, to collect it. And it went away almost immediately, right? It was like the greatest experience of his life. And as soon as he had it, he wanted to give a name to it and put it in a certain box so he could, treasure it in a certain way. And life isn't like that, particularly. So at the same time, I would deeply guess that it's a very deep blessing for her to have you at her bedside, somebody who's practicing, somebody who is working at being present. Probably, usually when somebody's dying, almost everybody around them is either pushing the suffering away, saying, "Oh, it's going to be okay. Let's not think about this too much," or they're saying, "Oh my God, this is a tragedy." And to have just one person in the room who, at least some of the time, is able to be there in a balanced way is a really profound gift for both of you. Thank you for what you're doing.
Thank you, Dale. Thank you so much.